Welcome, and thanks for listening to Intrinsic Investigations. My name is Mr. Olivo, and I created this podcast because I've been fortunate enough over the last decade to see unique and thought-provoking projects happen in my classroom, and we wanted a place to showcase them. The true heart of this podcast lies not in the content discovered, but in exploring the personal stories of these young researchers as they journey through uncharted and unfamiliar intellectual terrain. By sharing their stories, we hope to normalize the challenges and frustrations that come with independent research, and also share those moments where students transcend the normal grind of the school day to discover concepts that range from the global to deeply personal. We will begin with a brief introduction to the student of focus, why they picked their topic, and discuss their growth over the course of the last year. It should be mentioned that the opinions expressed in this podcast in no way reflect the opinions of our school district, Bergen County Technical Schools and Special Services, or our school itself, Bergen County Technical High School, Teterboro, or the College Board. The work detailed in this podcast was most likely completed in AP Capstone, but this podcast is in no way affiliated with the College Board. This is an episode potentially 3 years in the making, Sophia?
Yes.
All right. 3 years in the making. You want to introduce yourself, and then we'll talk about your work real quick.
Okay. Hi, my name's Sophia. I'm a junior in AP Research, and my project is on shifting gender representation across adaptations. So it's a quantitative content analysis of animated and live-action Disney princess films.
And what did you find out, if we could almost make this like a mini abstract? So that was what you did. What did you find out about these Disney princesses?
So the biggest thing that I found out was that when Disney princess movies are remade into their live action versions, they do represent gender androgynously, which here just means like in the coding framework that I used, both male and female traits were represented the same, but you would only really be able to see this when you looked at gender representation as a whole within the film, not within each individual character.
Which movies did you use to look at this?
So I used two storylines. So one animated and one live action version. So I used the Snow White storyline because that was like the earliest Disney princess and also the most recent remake. And then I also used Beauty and the Beast. So, and that was like the most like GDP, gross income made from a live action Disney princess film. So I chose that one.
It made the most shkarol. It made the most money.
Yes, it made the most money.
Okay, it made the most money. Are you a fan of escarole, by the way?
I have no idea what that is.
Okay, never mind. All right, sorry. I was just using some Italian slang. Then that's what you found out. All right, so let's rewind a little bit. Your work for the even in ninth grade, you did something examining Disney princesses.
Yes.
in our intro to research class. In your time analyzing the content that's put out by the Disney Corporation, are there any patterns or themes that you've noticed in examining their media with a critical eye?
I will say, especially with gender representation, I think the most like obvious pattern that's been noted by almost every scholarly source regarding Disney princess films is just that over time, Disney princesses are represented more androgynously. It's also something as a viewer that you can kind of see if you compare like more modern Disney princesses, like even if you're just casually watching Moana versus casually watching Snow White, you can see like Moana takes a lot more, and Moana's a very recent Disney princess, but
valid.
Yeah.
Would we even consider her a princess?
That's another thing that, sometimes because they're kind of, or Disney itself is trying to push away this narrative of like what the traditional princess is supposed to look like, a lot of the time like the more modern Disney princesses don't necessarily fit in like that specific category, so children don't necessarily recognize them as princesses like when they're younger, so they don't look at them and say, oh, that's a princess. They just think of them as their own character.
Right. Oh, interesting. I never could I've never seen Moana. I've only seen...
It's so good. You need to see it.
That's what everyone tells me.
And it's not stereotypical, as I found freshman year.
Oh, okay. All right. Let's talk about what you found out freshman year. So before freshman year, your consumption of Disney media was like what? Like what? How would you consume Disney media? Or would you consume Disney media? Like I don't know.
When I was little, a lot in elementary school, I loved Disney princesses. So we went to...
Who was your fave?
Beauty and the Beast, or Belle.
Belle?
Yes.
She reads a lot of books.
She does.
Yeah.
I read a lot of books when I was little.
Oh, okay.
So I was like...
Was that something you related to?
Yes. So I was like, Belle was my favorite princess. When I was little, like I would like dress up as them for Halloween and stuff. So yeah.
So she resonated the most with you because she was intelligent. She read books. Was the connection?
Yeah, I liked her more than like the other princesses because I felt like, especially now looking back, like the early era princesses are more like kind of submissive and that kind of thing. So I feel like little me just wanted someone who liked books.
Yeah, I mean, Sleeping Beauty is literally she's asleep.
The whole time.
I have not watched Sleeping Beauty in a long time. What is the name of
Aurora?
Aurora. That's a cool name. I didn't know that was it.
Yeah.
Growing up, did you have friends that were attached to other Disney princesses other than Belle, or was like she the belle of the ball, for lack of a better term?
Okay, my best friend growing up, she loved Rapunzel because they both had really long blonde hair, and she liked the like adventure of like Rapunzel's the princess where she was like locked in a tower, and then she like escapes. So my friend loved that when we were little. And then when Frozen came out, everyone liked Elsa. So
that's interesting because your connection to Belle was more of like an intellectual behavior, and your friend's connection was just like a straight up physical. This thing's similar. That's my fave.
Kind of. She also, I'm not gonna lie, little me also liked the fact that we were both like brunette with brown eyes. So I was like, okay, like there was like there's a mix of both.
All right, so there's multiple layers of representation then that was being seen there. So you grow up loving Belle, loving you being a fan of Disney media. At that point, had you been to a Disney park of some kind?
Yes, I had. I even went on a Disney cruise.
You went on a Disney cruise?
Yeah.
What's that like? I don't even.
I just remember getting a lot of autographs and going swimming.
Who did you get autographs from?
You get when you go to like any like the Disney things, they would have all like the like characters dressed up, and then you would go to them and you would bring your little book and they would sign them.
Oh my gosh, I didn't even know this was a thing.
Oh my gosh.
I have at that point in my life, I think I was at Disney when I was like 2, so I don't remember anything. Okay, so we've got this context of you and your background with Disney. All of a sudden, 9th grade happens, you're in intro to research, 4th quarter comes around, these 2 teachers make you do this project where you have to analyze something, you have to do a content analysis, we talk about that method. How did you then approach applying that method to Disney films? Because you did Moana and...
No, I just did Moana.
You just did Moana. Moana was the one film you examined. Yeah, you only had like a month. So
yeah,
this is like the baby steps. So when you were analyzing Moana, how did you do it in a systematic way?
So the methodology that I used back then is from England et al. In 2011, and I even used that same methodology this year. And that methodology itself is like very systematic. Mm-hmm. So you have these like predefined traits, and you look at each character's action, and then you kind of categorize that action underneath those predefined traits. Those traits that you're given in the England framework are already automatically sorted as masculine and feminine. So after you've coded everything, all of the character's actions or their representation is kind of automatically sorted into being masculine and feminine. And then from there, the goal is to have like a 50-50 split. So that's kind of how you determine gender representation through that.
And that England... I think it's England et al. 2016?
No, 2011.
2011. I'm sorry. Is there an England 2016 as well?
No, but there's a Hein England 2018.
Okay, that's where I'm getting messed up here. So this England 2011 study, which is going to ground your Moana work, and it's going to ground what we're going to end up talking about later in the episode.
Yeah.
Why did it resonate with you? Like, what about it was useful to you when examining film and trying to really pin down gender portrayal, and I guess like gender stereotypical portrayal?
So I remember being a little baby 9th grader and reading through all the like gender stereotype studies with Disney princesses, and I was kind of getting like a little bit lost because I feel like qualitative analysis, like it has like so many benefits, but for me, I feel like it was a little bit difficult to kind of like trudge through and trying to like, especially a lot of the studies surrounding these Disney princesses and gender, sometimes their conclusion is just like, well, it's both stereotypical and like non-stereotypical.
Yeah, there you go.
So for me, like, that was a little bit confusing. And what I liked about the England study was the fact that you could get like these concrete kind of, or semi-concrete kind of numbers and percents. So for me, that resonated more, and it made it a lot more clear to understand, oh, like, not only through words is gender evolving, but we can also see like literally like numerically it's going from being like 10% masculine in the 1960s to 58% masculine in 2011.
You needed those numbers. You can correct me if
Yes.
I'm wrong, but you needed those numbers to feel sure that the patterns that you were seeing actually existed beyond just your own subjective experience.
Yeah.
Who is England?
So she is a research professor. She's actually pretty like established. I think the study specifically that I used in the framework, it had been cited like over 700 times.
Okay, all right.
So I felt pretty confident in using it. It wasn't like some random person that just like happened to make a study in a framework, and I was like, you know what? I like this. I'm going to use it.
Found it on Google Scholar. It's got to be good. And did you find any other studies that employed the same framework that England used?
Yes. So there were 2 remakes of England's study. It was Hein England et al. In 2018, which literally just took that exact same framework and just applied it to the new Disney movies that had been made. Because at that point, like from 2011 to 2018, there had been like a few more. And then there was another study, which I was actually thinking of using. It was Clark, and I think it was in 2024. And so it expanded England's framework, and I think it went from having like 29 codes to almost 50 codes, I want to say. And included like gender neutral behaviors and things like that.
Okay, that adds a little nuance.
Yeah, it adds that nuance, but it expanded it significantly and then applied it to everything. So
Wow.
yeah.
All right. So you had that framework going in. When you shifted to this year, so it's 2 years later, it's your junior year of high school. At the beginning of the year, how did you select the films that you wanted to look at? Like, what were the films you looked at, and how did you end up picking them?
So the films that I looked at were the live action and animated Snow White and the live action animated Beauty and the Beast. So for the Snow White, I kind of knew going into the project that I wanted to use Snow White because her film is the first ever Disney princess. I think in 1937, I want to say, is when her film was. And it also is the most recent live action remake. So it's in 2025. So that live action remake has never been evaluated before. And then it's also such a huge gap in time.
Yeah, you're right, 1937 for the original, and then 2025.
Yeah, which is a huge gap in time.
That's almost a century.
Yeah. So,
okay. And those films are obviously made in a context.
Yeah.
And it centers around, it's fair to say that Snow White is the main character in
yeah,
the story.
Snow White's definitely the main character.
Yeah, I'm just making sure. Because I know in some of your work, I think you were talking about, or I had another student talking about time spoken. And like in Aladdin, the student was examining like the percentage of female character dialogue. And Aladdin is one of those where there's barely any female dialogue, and if there's any, it's coming from Jasmine. And I didn't even think about it, but I was like, oh my gosh, like, yeah, she's
that would be an interesting thing to look at, because I feel like I wasn't necessarily looking at like how much dialogue. I was just looking at like what are their actions, where does this where does this fit in.
Yeah, you're looking at behavior.
Yeah.
But that's totally fine. It's what you decided to focus on. There's so much going on in these films. Like, all right. So you've got the oldest film with a very modern remake in 2025, and then you've got the biggest GDP grossing of the two with Beauty and the Beast.
Yes.
Do you know offhand the time difference between the live action and the animated Beauty and the Beast?
I want to say the animated is a middle era princess, which is also a big factor in my choosing. So I wanted to have one early era and one middle era princess.
Can you explain to people because you use there's the early, middle,
and modern,
yes. Which eventually the modern will, in
it'll be something
years,
else.
It'll be something else. But you have the early, middle, and modern Disney eras. When does the early begins with Snow White, and when does it end?
So the early era princesses, Disney itself, the way that they kind of make their Disney princess films, it's kind of like this like burst of animation where it's like, okay, we're gonna like have all these movies kind of coming out, and then it's like this like dormant period, and then it does it again. So the early era princesses are Snow White, Cinderella, and Sleeping Beauty. So those are like from like the 30s and I think to the 60s is those princesses. Yeah. So those are very much like your very stereotypical princesses. They're very submissive, kind of like more dormant. We even said before, like Aurora barely speaks and she's asleep for most of her film. She's not a very active character.
Is she the main character?
She's supposed to be. I think she's supposed to be the main character because like she's Aurora, like Sleeping Beauty. She is the Sleeping Beauty.
She is the title character. If you had to guess, who has the most dialogue in that movie, if not her?
I would guess.
Is it Maleficent?
I don't even know. Yeah. I would say maybe the fairies or the prince.
Wow. Okay. All
which
right. Well,
is its own thing in
It's
itself.
its own thing. Yeah, we can't delve into that.
So then you have your middle era princesses. So this is kind of when Disney kind of like picks back up again. You have like some elements of feminism coming in because this is happening during the 1980s, I want to say, to the 1990s. So you have like some feminism. Women are starting to enter the workforce.
I was in it. That was Little Mermaid. I saw The Little Mermaid in theaters.
Wow.
Yeah. I don't even remember what year, though. I feel like I was like maybe 10. I don't know. Do you know when that came out?
I don't know.
Beauty and the Beast came out when I was 10. So that's definitely not that. All right. So that's the middle. That's the middle era. And now we're entering the modern era.
So the modern era, I want to say the movies started in like the 2000s. So these characters are, especially as you kind of get later on with like character development and kind of like as time progresses, we can definitely see these characters evolve much more. Like most studies, like they all unanimously kind of agree that modern era princesses are like the most androgynous or non-stereotypical representation.
Do they ever give a reason why? I mean, obviously, the society's evolution and like American society's evolution in terms of female perception is changing in that 100-year span where we're going from Snow White, almost 100-year span. But is that what I'm sure papers that you've come across have tried to discuss this? Like, what is the driver of these portrayals of female characters?
I think the main driver is, again, I think it's just the social context. I believe Sun in 2023, I want to say, talked a lot about how the early era princesses or each princess era is very much reflective of like the role of women at the time, and kind of, especially for the early era princesses, it's a representation of like the ideal woman of the time. It's like very submissive, like you're not like, none of the early era princesses are ever really taking their own initiative and kind of getting what they want or not relying on a prince.
Right. So then they're idealized in the early era. Is their idealization happening now in the modern era?
That is something that I'm not completely sure of. But if I were to kind of guess, I would say that I think there is a little bit of idealization occurring because there are still some stereotypes that we see in modern Disney princesses. They're not going to be completely non-stereotypical all the time. You're always going to be able to find something that might be a little like iffy. But I think especially now there's a little bit more of a narrative of like women being able to kind of be more assertive and be more like, I guess, non-stereotypical or not like super ultra feminine.
Mm-hmm. So let's get into then your findings here, like what you actually found out. So you've got this England et al. Framework. You apply it to the live action, and the animated films. And what did you find when you ran all the numbers? Like what's happening with Snow White? What's happening with Belle? Because really those are they're not just the focus in your case too.
No.
Because you're applying this to the prince as well. What is the name of the prince in Snow White? Is it just Prince Charming? Or is he just the prince? I don't even know.
I think he was just the prince. And I think there's a name for him, but they don't refer to him as that in the movie. Like, they don't call him, like, oh, Prince, like,
They're
name.
just like, hey, guy.
It's just like, oh, that's the prince. But in the live action, the prince actually takes like a larger role. So he's named Jonathan, and he's like a civilian.
Okay.
But that's something that we can delve into after we talk about the princesses.
Let's talk about
first.
the princesses, and then we'll end on the princesses.
So for the princesses, starting with Snow White, she is actually the only character in my study where just looking at her character's representation and just comparing like live action and animated Snow White using a statistical test, we can see that there was like a very clear statistically significant evolution in the character.
Okay.
With Beauty and the Beast, Belle, even when she was coded, she actually already had that perfect 50-50 split of androgyny, which for me was a pretty surprising finding.
So in the 90s version,
yeah,
there was already a progressive portrayal.
There was already. I think a lot of it has to do also because of the nature of England's coding framework. Some maybe more like stereotypical aspects in the 90s that maybe the coding framework might not have been able to pick up on, that the qualitative studies that have already kind of said like these middle era princesses are kind of stereotypical. Like the framework wasn't really able to pick up on all of those, but statistically she was. And the live action had, I think, a 3% increase in masculine characteristics. So she was 53% masculine, but statistically those are pretty much the same representation.
So just to make sure I'm hearing you right, there's a huge shift in the portrayal of Snow White. However, and that shift would be androgynous in the sense that there's more of like there's less over-reliance on stereotypically feminine characteristics.
Yeah.
But when you look at Belle, it seems like her 90s representation was already fairly progressive. So then, even though there's a shift, it's so small because, again, I don't know what the ideal benchmark here is.
Oh, it's 50-50.
It is 50-50. So she's already at that point.
Yeah, she's already at this ideal benchmark, which is why I found that and I was like, wait a minute, what's going on? So I also looked at the prince representation, and I think the prince in Snow White, so he also technically didn't show statistically an evolution. But if we look at character counts, and this is the same for the Beast as well, both the male characters in the films, they have significantly more representation in the live action versions. Like I think in Snow White, the prince alone, I think had around 100 more like codes in the live action version. And that was actually really impactful for the overall gender representation. Like one study, she had analyzed the live action like films qualitatively, Akimoto et al., I think in 2024. And she found that this increased prince representation helped to kind of like negate some other like stereotypical tropes. So like love at first sight, things like that.
Yeah.
But
oh my gosh, I didn't even think of that. But if it's love at first sight, you don't really need that prince or princess to really be in there that long. It's just put them in, and then it's like, oh my gosh, I love that person.
And then they ride off into the sunset.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, wow.
So then I was like...
Limits your screen time.
I know. It limits him. It's a pretty huge limit.
Yeah.
But ultimately, I ended up looking at comparing the gender representation of like the prince and princess within each film to each other. So it was like Snow White in the live action and Jonathan in the live action. Compare them to like is gender statistically different between them? So are they filling separate gender roles? And I found that in the animated film, both animated films, gender was portrayed differently in both characters. There was statistical significance. So to what that means in context is basically the princess is filling one gender role, the prince is filling another gender role. Versus in the live action, there was no statistical significance for either character. So that means gender is represented the same in both. And
what are the implications of that? Like, as someone who watched the films, because I think that's an interesting point you're bringing up, like what are the implications of that equal, like not so overly relying on traditional gender roles to portray these characters? Is there any, what do you see as an audience member?
I think as an audience member, you're kind of able to see, I think, especially in the context of looking at gender representation, it's very easy, especially other studies as well, they mainly just look at the prince's characters. But if you're trying to analyze how stereotypes are being portrayed to the audience, you need to look at who are the main characters here. And usually it's the prince and the princess. So you kind of need to look at how gender is portrayed in both, because if the princess is portrayed androgynously, but then you have the prince represented as this super like stereotypically masculine character, let's say there's like a little boy who's watching this film and he looks and he sees this prince character being super masculine, he might try and emulate those ultra stereotypical traits.
Yeah. Like Gaston.
Yeah.
But Gaston's...
He's kind of like poked fun at.
Yeah, his hypermasculinity is a point of ridicule.
But even then, the Beast himself, like, he was very stereotypically masculine portrayed in, like, the animated film. I think he was 60%, or a little over 60% masculine representation. So even there, like, you're kind of looking at him, if you're, like, a boy watching the film, and let's say you're trying to look up to, like, the guy character, you can see there's that stereotypicalness.
Maybe before we start like closing this out, maybe let's talk about those stereotypes. So like in the England framework, what would be example stereotypes that would be applied to the female characters or the feminine stereotypes, or what would be like the male masculine stereotypes that one would see?
I would say the big like masculine characteristics that I found were assertive. So basically like making an assertion. Is it like assertiveness or aggressiveness? It's like being assertive, making the assertion.
Like we're doing this, and this is how we're going to solve this problem.
Yeah, so that I would code and I'd be like, okay, that's assertiveness. Leader, so this was categorized if they were like, they had to physically be leading a group of people. So it couldn't just be like they were standing in a group and they were all standing together and they were talking. He was like, I think you should do this. It was more so like they were in the front and they were guiding everyone to what to do.
Does the Beast do that?
No, the Beast doesn't do that.
But does...
Belle doesn't either, but Snow White in the live action actually does. She leads like the whole village and goes up to the castle.
Okay, all right, okay.
So another one is like athletic and strength. Like those are two separate codes. So those are two pretty good ones. And also intellect. So that is something that could have also been a huge factor with Belle's character because she's very intellectual. She's reading books frequently. And then,
all of those sound like, in a way, very positive stereotypes for males.
Yeah, I feel like that was another thing I kind of noticed was some of like the masculine characteristics. I was like, well, you kind of want to be assertive a little bit as a person. And then for the stereotypically feminine characteristics, I would say a lot of it was submissiveness. So a lot of it's kind of like countering. So like assertiveness, submissiveness, like weakness, strength, like those kind of like...
Yeah, it just seems like the female stereotypes that you're describing sound negative. I don't know if I'm missing something, but it's like they almost sound negative to me.
But also, those are stereotypes.
Ah, yes.
So they're kind of in their essence not exactly the best things. But there were also other more positive things for like feminine like stereotypes, like maybe being nurturing or things like that, or affectionate, versus for male characteristics, it would be like unemotional. So that would be like...
emotionally closed off or something like that.
So there was like kind of like these positive traits and these negative traits in both.
All right, so what's the most frequently occurring stereotype for Snow White in the old film versus the new film?
The old film, the most frequent, like her number one code was fearfulness. There was probably like a 5-minute stretch of literally just her running and being scared.
I'm somewhat imagining it. I haven't watched the movie in probably like 3 decades, but just like the
yes, like literally
like the hand over the forehead kind of like.
And she was just running, and it was literally, I was sitting there and I was miserable coding it because I'd have to pause it every single time and write it down and pause and write.
Right. So she's afraid.
In the live action, her most common code was assertiveness, and it was actually a stereotypically masculine trait. And she did that, I feel like, a lot throughout the film.
Did she get scared at all? Was she allowed room for being scared?
That was her second most common code.
Oh, really?
Because she also had the running scene.
You need to keep the running away.
Yes.
Okay, but it wasn't the most frequently occurring one. So it was still there. It was still present. That's a good thing to note. All right, and then Belle's Belle's most frequently occurring code, is it her intellectuality? Is that the...
I don't think for Belle it was her intellectuality.
Yeah, you could...
I'm trying to look for it now because I don't remember it off the top of my head.
I think I know exactly what scene you're talking about too, where...
her running through the forest.
Running through the forest. And...
Okay, so Belle's most common code in the animated film is assertiveness, and it's also her most common code in the live action, which I feel like kind of tracks because she didn't really show much of a evolution.
Yeah. Did anything change with her?
So
Other than now she's a real person. Who is she? Emma Watson, I think.
yeah, she's Emma Watson.
now instead of being drawn, she's Emma Watson. Anything else change with her?
Yeah, so there was changes. Like in the live action film, I will say there were actually less codes for intellectual behaviors.
Oh, really?
Which I thought was interesting because in the qualitative studies they talk about how like she's kind of trying to teach these other girls or this one girl how to read and how that shows, I don't know, her being intellectual. But for me, I ultimately ended up coding that as something stereotypically feminine because the context of it felt very like affectionate. She felt very motherly kind of towards this girl.
So it's more nurturing?
Yeah, more nurturing.
See, because in my head I was thinking, oh, maybe it's leadership, but you said it has to be like a large group of people.
Yeah, for leadership, I think, I'm trying to remember the exact words because there were very specific parameters.
Yeah, parameters for the
But
group.
it was something about they had to be in front of a group of people.
Like, yeah. There is an element of mentorship for her teaching this child how
Yeah,
to read.
that was another thing. You couldn't like double code things. It was
Yeah.
one code, one action.
So they were discrete. That's totally fine. We have to do this during a class period, so we only have 5 minutes left. But what do you think is the most important finding from your work? And like, what do you think the implications of that finding are?
I think the absolutely most important finding from my work is that you need to be, people and researchers need to be looking at gender through both characters because the main shift that I was able to see was only really visible when you were looking how does gender interact between the two characters rather than just isolated. Because again, like it's a film, the characters are going to be interacting with each other and you're going to be interpreting them more together. No one watches a film and they're like, I am only going to watch one character and I'm going to like close my ears for the rest of them.
Well, the interaction's incredibly important.
Yes.
Unless you're dealing with a movie where there's literally one character, which
A one-man show.
Yeah, if there's an experimental film out there like that, maybe I got to check that out. It could be a one-woman show. You know, it's possible. I don't know. What would you started this process, and really like to the point you're at now in 9th grade. What would you tell a student who is, you know, maybe just developing that initial curiosity you had your 9th grade year about following through with research? Like, what advice would you give them?
I think the biggest piece of advice I could give is you need to be willing to kind of go through the hurdles and be very consistent with what you want. So freshman year, I'd analyzed Moana, but it was because I was a baby freshman and I didn't look deep enough into other research. So Moana had technically already been analyzed. So I came into sophomore year at the end of the year and I was like, wait a minute, this study's been done. So I kind of had this panicky moment, and then it might have been you or it might have been someone else, but someone was like, you should look at live action films instead. And
it definitely wasn't me because I wouldn't be able to say that for ethical reasons.
Wait, this was sophomore year.
Oh, was it sophomore year? Oh, then I might have been able to say it. I thought it happened our junior year.
No, because I was freshman and then sophomore right after SEM, the little project.
I might have been like, hey, what about live action films?
And I remember being like, wait a minute, that's like so cool. And so I looked into that. So I would say be consistent, go with the hurdles, and again, consistency is key. So you got to like your topic and you got to try not to get too sick of it.
What does consistency look like? You're saying like consistency is key. What does it look like? What does a
to me,
researcher who's being consistent look like?
To me, it means I picked my project. I've done my work on it. I'm not just going to sit there and I'm going to ignore my work for like 4 months and then the day before it's due be like, oh my gosh, okay, I got to code all like 4 movies right now. For me, I think consistency was I picked my topic. I liked my topic. I might not like it right now when I'm coding my movies, but I know that somewhere deep inside of me, I enjoy this topic. So I need to push through and just do it.
There's that love.
Yes, there's love. I might not like it right now, but I love my topic.
You love it. All right. That's awesome.
So, yeah.
All right. Thank you, Sophia.
Thank you, Mr. Olivo.